Okay, the live stream thing. I'll wait for this little red line to move up. I will say some opening remarks and Tlingit. Oh, I gotta find bridges first. Qanaya kwahikaya takatiuhan. Atlain kunas chi shak ti. Ak kwan ani kok aya ti. Ya hastu shish kohas ani awa. Shkut do sak ani. Kaach tla de tla awa Heidelberg gadachawiho. Wasa ach tu yak yagi takatiuhan. Siku shikatku yagi. Ye awa ach tu sagu yi nati. Wasa ach tu sagu hastu chait ayak ach tu sa achi. Ya konachawe has aus saku. Data tinach sakaya ti. Kwashikatku kekachlitsini. A joyak hayati. Ye awa tledihin ho ach tlesta sa ayak kuke hayuk atangi. House ne hayuk atangi. A joy yake aya wujin khasati ya yagi. Nilchish. On behalf of the University of Alaska Southeast, particularly our Alaska Native Languages program, I want to welcome you all on this Indigenous Peoples Day. It's such a wonderful day. We didn't even send our kids to school. We said, you all stay home, just be Indigenous. But then we didn't realize that there was actually school today for the kids. So here we are. But it's such a wonderful day to spend together visiting about Indigenous excellence. And the focus here is on the future of Indigenous language revitalization. So I reached out to some of my beloved and wonderful colleagues to see if they would just have a conversation with us here. We typically have a class going on at this time called Foundations of Indigenous Language Education. That class is in existence in large part due to a program started by the Alaska Heritage Institute, Hayuqatangi Dei is what it's called, our language pathway, with the goal of increasing the number of teachers of Alaska Native languages and looking into teacher certification, teacher licensure, and eventually a Master of Arts in teaching Indigenous languages. So with us today, we have Larry Kimura, calling in from Hawaii. Larry was a teacher of mine when I was in a PhD program, and he was our, we stayed at Larry's house, and we just were really fortunate to have time with him and to visit and to get tutoring in our Hawaiian and also get tutoring in our advocacy for language revitalization. I just love and admire Larry and all the work that he's done. We also have Leslie Harper coming to us from Anishinaabe Ani, from Ojibwe country. And I'm very, very fortunate to know her, to be able to work with her in her advocacy work at a national level with the National Coalition on Native American Language Schools and Programs. And also visiting with her reminds me of my times when I was attending the University of Minnesota and learning a lot from Anishinaabe people that I became friends with down there. We also have Mique'l Dangeli, who's here with us, calling from British Columbia, and she does wonderful, amazing work with the Tsimshian language, Smelgach, and also with Indigenous arts, both performative arts, dancing, and also visual arts as well. We also have, calling from Dena'ina Ani, Joel Isaak, an incredible language teacher, scholar, and also is really leading the way with a lot of conversations on compacting Indigenous education and what could be done to increase Indigenous control of education. And then we have Roy Mitchell, who's with us as well, who's a research analyst for the Alaska Native Language Preservation and Advisory Council. And my experiences with Roy go back to the early 2000s when he was working in Tlingit Ani and really helping us to formalize a lot of our procedures for moving into immersion environments and really trying to privilege our indigenous languages. And this is the panel. I think at this time I'll see if our Chancellor, Karen Carey, would like to say any welcoming remarks on behalf of her office at UAS.
Thank you, ʼunei. Isn't this a glorious day? We finally get to celebrate our Indigenous peoples. And I am so thrilled about that. And I am really looking forward to this panel this afternoon. As you know, ʼunei has been working tirelessly on Alaska Native languages here in Southeast Alaska. And the number of students that are engaged in our programs has just skyrocketed. And we feel just so thankful that we are helping to save the languages. So I'm looking forward to this panel. Thank you all of you for attending. It's great to see everybody. I wish we could be in person, but maybe someday soon we will be. So ʼunei, I'll turn it back over to you, but thank you so much for arranging this and putting it on. Really appreciate it.
Goodness, Chish. And I'd like to thank all of the Alaska Native faculty at UAS who collaborated and figured out what kinds of activities we could be doing for Indigenous Peoples Day. Wherever you're at, I hope you are doing some good stuff for Indigenous peoples. So the panel, I'll put the panel in the chat in order that we will sort of go in, since we don't have, I'll try and work it a bit like a round table. So we're all sitting at a round table here on Zoom. And to start, let's go around and in a couple minutes, if you could please just say hello, introduce yourself, and give an opening statement about the future of language revitalization, and then we'll move into our topics. So starting with Larry.
Hi, aloha no kako apoloa, mahalo e ʼunei. E ike ho ana ya oe, mena hoa hoi a koko mai on our Indigenous Peoples Day, I guess it's called now. And here in Hawaii, we're reminded this morning by our colleague, Dr. Pila Wilson, that Hawaii was probably not, how do I say, come upon by the outside world by Captain James Cook, of course, from England, London, England, and that was less than under 300 years ago. But for some other Indigenous peoples, maybe it was much longer, and so we're kind of fresh as supposedly come upon. I hate to use the word discovered because we discovered them too at the same time. So anyway, I am an associate professor here at the College of Hawaiian Language that was established back in 1997 at the University of Hawaii at the Hilo campus on the island of Hawaii, where we have our active volcano going on right now. We had a big earthquake the other day, just yesterday, not from Alaska, but right here from our island of Hawaii in Ka'u district. And so that's my 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Mahalo nui. And Leslie.
Kitanime kunanim ginawasa giwimi graduate inanim patagosine gomasa chini dashindu dadien gomasa gitanwewanan nina sa sagjwe gabwe kwe gaye omasa Ojibwe Anishinaabe wa King and Dayan omasa in the Canesian. I am Leslie Harper. I am Ojibwe. I'm from Ojibwe, Waking, Ojibwe country here in the Great Lakes region in the center of this continent, located here on my homelands, my Ojibwe, where my Ojibwe relatives have been for quite a long time, and where we remain. And I'm from the Leech Lake Nation, and that's located within Minnesota. ʼUnei is somewhat familiar with Minnesota, has spent some time out here, so that's really a nice connection too. I am a grassroots Native American languages revitalizer, and we'll get into that some more up the road. We can talk a little bit more about what we did here, but I'm just really happy and really grateful that you folks invited me in today, because this is energizing. This is reciprocal. I get a lot of energy from listening to the other folks too. Miigwech.
Miigwech. And Mique'l.
Amnasad chatni snoosum, some shodom noosum do I. Wux amadi, ligi takwan, de wat wat go, lach yubum Tsimshian gwa, lach yubum Tsimshian de wat go, aluhot go. I will hawksum de gwasum saget one. My name is Simshodom Newsom, and I am from Metlakatla, Alaska, and I'm living here on the other part of our traditional territory that the colonial border cuts through, which is known by its name, Terrace, British Columbia, but it's our traditional territory. And I said that it really just fills my heart to gather with all of you here today. And in terms of a statement on the future of Indigenous languages, I would say that I would love for some of this conversation to talk about what the pandemic has done to our language revitalization efforts for us, Tsimshian people. The border is a huge issue, this colonial border. I've been fighting to stay in British Columbia to continue my Tsimaliaq revitalization work. I'm a adjunct professor in the Tsimaliaq fluency program, where I just finished teaching 4th year Tsimaliaq online for a year with our elders. We had 4 elders online and 1 linguist online with all of our students as I was teaching. And we've just seen it flourish in all of these incredible, beautiful ways, in that people have gone inwards. I think that isolation does that for everybody, but for many, it led to their path of making a clear decision and dedicating their time to learning our people's language. And a group that I help to found, one of the founders of, is Raising Tsimaliaq, which is a nursery rhyme group in Tsimaliaq that focuses on essentially this type of circle time experience that little ones have with their caregivers, but all in our language. And I just, like, that was born out of the pandemic. It was born out of, well, also my motherhood. My baby was 4 months old at the time that the first lockdown happened, and all of the support system went out from underneath all of us. And it's actually been a blessing, the way that it's heightened our efforts in many ways and made them more accessible. So that's what I have on my goal, my heart.
Oh, excellent. And Joel.
Dukidli Tareshtish, Fedora Calendar Pennington Shachita, Sharon Isaac Shumta, David Isaac Stukta, Dena'ina Tlekayis Shiiji, Gashtana Joel Isaac Shiiji, Dena'ina Eshlanshit, Kinai Shagu Shakaya Kailanda, and Khali. So I just start off, I wanted to, it's a respectful way of asking permission to speak and acknowledging everybody else in the room. And starting off with my grandmother, her name is Fedora Calendar Pennington. My mother's name is Sharon Isaac. My dad's name is David Isaac. My Dena'ina or Dena'ina name is Tlekayis, which means salmon skin. And my English name is Joel Isaac. I live here in Kenai, which is Dena'ina lands. And I want to say thank you very much for having me today with you all. The future of language revitalization, I think that my kind of quick thoughts on that are that the time is now. It's been that way for quite a while, but we've reached a critical mass phase, and I think it's time for we have the energy and the support to take some very big steps. And that's made possible by lots of people working really hard. And there's some big steps we have to take in tandem as Indigenous people, but each one of our language groups also, I think, is at a stage where we're ready to take some pretty big steps. And so that's, to me, that's where like the future, the immediate future for language revitalization is at, is it's action. We're in an action time. And that's us as a collective, but also as an individual. I'm a Dena'ina language learner, and just me going through that journey, starting to do phases where I'm like, rather than thinking about stuff in English, I'm thinking about it in Dena'ina. And how would I say what in my head or out loud, what I'm seeing and experiencing? So those are, I think that's an example of kind of like little steps that are pretty big. They feel really big, but then there's also some of those community big steps that we have to take together. So Janan for having me.
Janan. And Roy. I think I made you a co-host. Roy Mitchell?
Yeah. Gosh, sheesh. Kasha Kishti, you had to a sack, late Kach, Enach Roy Mitchell, you had to a sack. Yeshnach Hut City, Scots nach Ayachat, J1 Ka Irish, Ka Jewish, Dutch Han Ayachat, Anchorage Yechat Yati. Uvanga in Upetun Pilak, California Miogu Galoctunga, Duanga, California Moon, Alaska Moon, 1976 me. Ilisak Duanga Ukarnek in Upetun, Suli Koyakan, Pangmapaki Inusurunga Anchorage me, Davwam Inusurunga Krikitarungi Sawami Utkarling Mil. My name is Roy Mitchell. I wasn't born in Alaska, but I've lived here most of my life. I moved up at the age of 17, among other things, to study Inupiaq language at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, or as it was called then, the University of Alaska. And I've been a student of Alaska Native languages ever since. And we'll talk about specifics of things later. But I wanted to say, as far as broad overview, future of language revitalization, I am both pessimistic and optimistic. The pessimism is if we look at the broad demographics of numbers of speakers is going down across the board. And I'm also optimistic because within these broad declines, we also have, gonna move my hand over here, I guess, we also have small ways in which there are new speakers coming to be, new second language speakers, and now some new first language speakers. So I have some optimism on the inside and some optimism sprinkles on the outside of my pessimism. Sheesh.
Sheesh. Thank you to you all. My name is ʼunei Lance Twitchell. I work in the Tlingit language, and my goal is to help all languages. I'm also Haida. I would love to get back into learning Haida again. I was learning with Julie Coburn, and I'm also Yupik. I would love to learn Yuchten. So thinking of my role as I'm just going to facilitate this panel. So I want to listen to you folks, and I'm going to ask you a few questions. And I guess we'll start with this. One time I went into the office of Keiki Kawae'a, and I said, I need to meet. We got to talk about this PhD thing I'm trying to do. And so I went into her office, and she had a desk, and then she had some couches. And she said, are we going to meet, or are we going to talk story? And I'm hoping we're going to do mostly kind of talk story. So I hope as panelists, you all are feeling relaxed and welcome. If we could do things in a better way these days, we would have you to our community. We would feed you, we would love you up, we would bring out songs and dances in your honor. But the colonial side of things is we have now 70 minutes to go through what I hope we're going to try and hit 4 kind of topics. And so that means we can't totally relax. We got to stay a little bit confined, but whatever happens, happens. So in the same order we just went in, please share your experiences and language revitalization in your current areas of focus. Starting with Larry. Oh, you're on mute, Larry.
Forgot about that. I have 2 minutes again. That's a big question.
Fine, we'll give you 5 whole minutes, but if you need to take longer, take it.
No. I don't want to take up other people's time. We all have to share. So, well, basically, we were teaching Hawaiian as a course in Hawaii because of our history being an independent country. It's a kingdom. And when the United States overthrew our kingdom and we went into becoming a territory, and I think Alaska beat us out and becoming the 49th state, we became the 50th state in 1959. So Hawaiian language was being taught at our University of Hawaii very early on in the Arts and Sciences program established in 1919. And that was because in our territorial government, we still had representatives from the kingdom, and they were very much concerned. Why is it that we're having Greek, Latin, German, and French and not Hawaiian? And so that was started back in 1921. However, our language was not taken seriously until late 1960s and 1970s, when we recognized we had less than maybe 2,000 native speakers, mostly all, of course, in their senior years. And this is a familiar story with many places. And we needed to bring our language back into the homes with our children. And the closest we could get to that was the establishment of the Ahapunana Leo schools, which we were in touch with our cousins in New Zealand, the Maori people. They started in 82, we started in 83. And this is what has linked us as participants. I myself, this is my 50th year teaching at the University of Hawaii system. Since 1971, thank you, ʼunei. Thank you, Leslie. And so when you said, my gosh, but what's important in Hawaii is that connecting to our community as fast as we could and working with the children. The youngest we could get to was, of course, 2.5 years to 3 years old. We also have since established 1, 2 only currently. Very expensive to do infant toddler from, say, 9 weeks old, and now we've taken them more like 8 months old, because that requires a little bit more personnel and all of those other requirements, physical requirements besides personnel requirements. But anyway, the ideal for us in Hawaii was working together at the university level or tertiary level, down into right to the very beginning at the earliest we could get to in preschool age. Of course, I mentioned also infant toddler. Now, early childhood education is becoming very important, not just for, of course, educational purposes, but what our country is going through right now with this COVID and the mindset of our leaders about the importance of education, the sooner the better. So fortunately, we pursued an educational program rather than just a daycare or a babysitting kind of program, because we wanted to reestablish our language as the medium of instruction in formal education. And that's how it started back from, we got established in 83 and our first schools, 84, 85. And then by 1987, we got into the Department of Education in the public school system in a program that is still being called a Hawaiian Immersion Program, but we like to call it a Hawaiian medium. And we have right now over 26 sites right now, not all of them complete K to 12, but we have 6 K to 12 sites. And the rest are school within a school. And the main challenges we have right now is just having enough teachers. The enrollment has steadily increased. So we know that over this period of years that our program has become successful enough in the area of the standard of education, as well in the standards of what is foremost, which is the bringing life back to our language and its connection to our people as a Hawaiian identified people. So as ʼunei knows, we have established, of course, our little program from just a program in the arts and sciences now into, of course, our bachelor's and our master's and PhD programs. Of course, we also are involved with teacher training for Hawaiian immersion, Hawaiian medium, I should say, which is becoming very, very important. And we have also a Hawaiian language center that helps to maintain, create curriculum material to support all of this. And then getting enough fluency going within our adult population that are producing our new generation of children and producing now native speaking children from the home and into the system that we've established through the educational programs from K to K20, we'd like to say P20, preschool to 20, up to college. So there are many challenges, of course, that are still facing us in not reclaiming, but more like revitalizing, bringing more life into our language. And that would be in the area of getting in what we're focusing. One of the areas we're focusing in is what we're called the sciences. Hawaii has some unique possibilities in using language more in this area of science. So that's kind of a brief update. I don't know if that was your question, but I tried to do that very quickly.
Maikai loa, mahalo.
Mahalo nui.
Hi. Leslie.
Anin, again, trying to be brief with this to give room to our other folks too. Experiences in language revitalization where I'm at in Ojibwe country, we too have this border that crosses our land, right? We are in, we've got our relatives on the America side and the Canada side of this border that crossed us. We're spread out over a pretty large range of this land. So there's a lot of Ojibwe folks and a lot of our related tribes out here. And some of us live more closely together, but we can be, a day away from folks, 2 days away from folks, depending on which end of Ojibwe country we travel from. So just a quick frame up, I was born, story's not going to be that long, but I kind of started to understand my own perspective on some of this stuff when I looked at the community that raised me up. The era of self-determination coming from the US Congress, you know, signing that law into place throughout the 1970s, and our home community folks saying, oh, this self-determination thing, now we're going to be able to run our own educational programs, our own health programs, you know, kind of get that middleman out of the way. Let's see, you know, what the Native communities really can do with that. And so our communities, my folks, my aunties and uncles, my parents' generation, they were busy putting together plans to operate our educational systems from our perspective in our reservation, in our communities. And, you know, this was kind of a new idea when this first came out in the late 1970s, instead of just being, you know, the government, the Bureau of Indian Affairs runs these schools, or you go to the public school that's run by the state of Minnesota or Wisconsin. You know, this was all of a sudden, you know, this is the allowance that Natives had been asking for. They were like, get out of the way, let us run our educational systems. Again, let us run our health systems too. You know, we keep talking about these treaty obligations. So that era of community members working together to come up with ideas on how to implement education and how to implement these systems that look like us. That was me as a little kid watching the adults kind of gather up and do this and try to figure out, you know, what's important to us as Ojibwe people here at Leech Lake, what should be included in, you know, a culture-based education setting that isn't happening, you know, from the American public school setting. And so, you know, I just say that because I have a perspective that, you know, sees possibilities and that believes in our own local determinations of that. And so, you know, we got some culture-based education into some of our education systems throughout the 1980s and 1990s, but they were, you know, they were like small steps in. And things were really changing really quickly as far as our language bearers and our culture bearers and our communities go. And I think too, with like just roads getting in better to our communities, and, you know, media reaching our communities even more soon, you know, we made some steps in getting some culture-based education. And then I think people maybe relaxed a little bit. And then we saw our communities just kind of relax and say, well, we got some classes going. We got some culture classes and some art classes at some high schools. And, you know, maybe we have a few language classes here and there. That sounds pretty cool. But then there came this whole American education like push throughout the 1990s and throughout the 2000s, you know, to, you know, really push this No Child Left Behind stuff. And our communities were a little too relaxed maybe, and just kind of went with it and said, okay, well, we'll just do whatever the state Department of Ed says. We're happy with a Ojibwe art class off here in the edge, you know. However, some of us folks in our community were not satisfied with just having a language class off on the side or after school, you know, and said, this isn't quite what my family or my home looks like. My home and my family is, you know, much more in tune with our ways of being. And if we're going to be in these compulsory school settings, if we're going to be in these compulsory places, you know, this should look a lot more like us. I was able to, I didn't even take Ojibwe language class in high school where it was offered, because at the time, 100,000 years ago, when I was a young lady in high school, it was an elective, but it was not a foreign language credit. that we needed to graduate from high school. There was Spanish and German offered in our high school, maybe French, but our Ojibwe language classes right here on our own lands didn't qualify for, high school graduation credit. So I, took some after school classes, but I didn't even get to take, classes in my language until I was college age and much older. And I got really interested in that. And our college classes could only take us to a certain, really high beginner level. And I said, I want to learn more. So I designed a master apprentice language learning program with some elders from our communities. And I spent a little over a year full time with some Ojibwe language speakers, just apprenticing to them. And we partnered with some other folks in reservations around us, so young adults who wanted to learn the language. We tried to keep it even, males and females, so we could have some gender balance and, everybody could have the experience. And we operated that for a couple of years. And then I was also raising my child in Ojibwe language. And then there came the compulsory school age. So I said, well, I don't want to send him to public school. So we heard about some stuff that these Hawaiians were doing with getting their children together with their languages. And one of our community members, so think of us over here in Minnesota, in Ojibwe country, way up in northern Minnesota on our reservation, saying, how can we make this? What is it called? An immersion school? What is it? A language? It's just all Ojibwe language all the time. And somebody said, yeah, they do it in Hawaii. Oh, how do we learn about that? And this was in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And somebody at our planning session, at our roundtable planning session said, call Hawaii. And they pointed to me. And so I was given the task to pick up the phone and say, hello, Hawaii. I had to find people. It was just, we heard something on the air, something in the wind. This was something that was, happening and going really well for, the Hawaiians. It was just funny. I just laugh at that story where people are like, call Hawaii, and the steps we had to take to figure out who and where and what was really happening and how we would even contact our relatives over there, the folks who would become our relatives, and just making cold calls. Hello, Hawaii. What do we do for language? We've gone, so since the early 2000s, we've worked together. We've modeled a lot of our activities on what is happening there and in other places around the country. And we did start a language immersion school. We grew it from a kindergarten through a grade 6 here at our reservation here at Leech Lake. I helped with some folks. And then through all of that, we just kept coming upon policy barriers. People kept trying to say, what are you doing in your Indian language? You can't do that, can you? And we were like, well, yeah, of course we can. This is who we are. We're self-governing people, right? But always people poking at us. So I've worked a lot on public policy, and we can talk about that in a little bit too. Always chipping away at public policies that are trying to stop us from using our languages. I look for the ways to open those doors and stuff. And so now we have this national coalition of Native American language schools and programs. And we work with folks, really cool folks all over the place. And work on supporting our rights to do this in our languages. Sorry for taking so long. I want to hear from the rest of you too.
Miigwech. It reminds me, I believe Joshua Fishman said something like, if you don't have a pro-Indigenous language policy, it's probably an anti-Indigenous language policy just by default. And so it was something like that. I'm sort of paraphrasing. And I just want to say half a day to any Chamorro people who are out there. I saw Tinakpungi has posted in the chat, and we used to hang out a lot in Hilo. Sinlodum Newsome.
Leslie, I would love to get the name of your coalition. I was sorry, I was just taking notes. So my really teaching at University of Alaska Southeast there in Juneau from 2016 to 2017 put me on the track that I am now. My PhD is in Northwest Coast First Nations art history. As ʼunei shared, I focus a lot on our visual and performing arts. And when I was interviewing for the job at UAS, and he can attest to this too, when they asked me if I would be open to teaching my language, I cried. I cried during an academic job interview. How unprofessional. but it was because man, it just hit me right in my gut, right in my heart, because every day on the commute from where I lived in Vancouver, this hour-long commute, I was listening to my elders in my iPod. I kept some Aliach with me everywhere, and I taught it in our dance group. After and before dance practices, I do kind of mini lessons. But when I argued for some Aliach, because there's two, you had to have two foreign languages to get a PhD in art history. And I had already had some Aliach count as one, and this was before reconciliation. So now universities would be all over this. I said, take my ACTFL assessment, and for my PhD, let me go up three, 4 levels. You know, I just want to get better. My language is critically endangered. All of these languages that you have as an option for me are not. And they wouldn't budge on it. So I ended up taking German, and it was like a German research class. I felt like I had a decoder ring, and I was just like decoding, because I wasn't saying anything in the language. I was just learning to use it as a researcher. Total waste of time, but it was a part of getting my PhD. And so when they asked that question, my uncle, my beep, Arnold Booth, was critically ill, and he was, 95 years old at the time, and we knew he wasn't going to be around much longer, and he was my longest standing Aliach teacher. And so I came to UAS and immersed myself in ʼunei's classes as I was teaching my first year, and taught my first university level Aliach class while supporting and being a part of the efforts of a grassroots based group who's phenomenal, doing amazing Aliach revitalization for our people, the Juneau language learners who are now just doing all of this. They were pioneers of Aliach social media prior to it being a regular thing to see our languages online. And I just came to a place where I did a study across Alaska. I went to Anchorage, Ketchikan, Metlakatla, trying to figure out what some of the barriers are in our language revitalization efforts, and how I could use my new position at UAS to help us get over any hurdles that I possibly could bring resources together to do that. So I put together a grammar intensive, because it seemed like many of us were getting to this point in our fluency where, we just needed a boost essentially to get further in our composition abilities and our speaking abilities. And I brought over Dr. Margaret Anderson, who is a linguist, and Velna Nelson, who is a fluent speaker, first language fluent speaker, who has relatives in our community. So she is very familiar with the way that our people in Alaska speak and our people in BC speak. And it was life-changing. The entire experience of being at UAS was life-changing, because I realized that at that time, we had 5 first language fluent speakers left in my community. And we had probably about 50 in BC. And essentially, I made one of the hardest decisions I've made in my life, which was to leave UAS, because I needed to take this time to study with our first language fluent speakers while they're still here. So I left Alaska and I came back to British Columbia, and I've called this time my postdoc because there was nothing. I looked at everything. I lived in BC way too long to be able to apply for a Fulbright or anything that would actually be a true academic postdoc. And I accepted a job as at Na'axagelikyo School, which is an independent First Nations K-12 school in Kitsim, where I taught some Aliach K-12 and developed curriculum and trained EAs in our language while working with our first language fluent speakers and developing my material to teach university level some Aliach at the University of Northern British Columbia, all simultaneously. This is before I had my son. And at that same time, I took the model of the Juneau language learners, which is, essentially come together once a week, have some fish spread on crackers and coffee and visit in some Aliach and just go essentially, it's a really just beautiful model of collaborative learning where everybody's a learner and everybody's a teacher. And I brought that to the 2 Tsimshian communities here, Kitsim-Kalem and Kittilas, and I helped to start learners groups. And all of that all at once. So I just was working these crazy days. And then I got pregnant, which was a miracle because we didn't think we could have children. So my baby is born of some Aliach language learning efforts, and he primarily speaks some Aliach. It's just amazing to hear babbling in some Aliach, which it was my tutu, my sister, who said, he doesn't babble like my grandkids. And just listening to him, like, it sounds nothing like English. And so it's just been this incredible, very difficult journey because, as I said, with all of the policies that Canada has put forward and the millions of reconciliation dollars, they have yet to do anything about the border issues. The fact that the Jade Treaty goes one direction. So if I was born in Canada and I decided to do this work in the US, I could go and be recognized as an American citizen. They do the gross blood quantum thing, but that's just what Americans are about, right? They're just obsessed with blood quantum. But at least that's an option. For those of us that are born in the States, we immigrate like everybody else. And so I am still in immigration limbo. And because the K-12 job that I had is not high enough on the ratings for immigration, and being an adjunct is not high enough on the ratings for immigration, for me to immigrate here to continue to do the work of learning and teaching and supporting our resurgence. I've had to accept a tenure track job a couple months ago that starts in January at the University of the Fraser Valley. So I'm in a position that many people who teach Indigenous language find themselves of, how do I make this sustainable? And that goes to policy changes, Leslie, and ʼunei knows that as well, because he teaches in the Yukon, and it makes it tough to stay any longer than just a couple weeks at the most. But these border issues, these infringe on our ability to work collaboratively. There are amazing people on both sides that we get into these situations where we hit that Indigenous border wall really hard, and it takes a lot out of us, and many people have walked away because of it. And I really feel that Zoom has really helped us overcome a lot. Some of the work that I was hoping to do for people in Alaska has happened over Zoom through Tlingit and Haida Central Council. We were able to get sponsorship from them to do our first, another grammar intensive, but one that was focused specifically on bringing our elders over here again online to our learners in Alaska. And most recently, my Raising Some Aliach that I talked about is finding a home outside of the houses that these songs are sung in. So all of these beautiful Tsimshian homes is now a part of the Kitsim Kalem Head Start program. So I've been training them for the past 3 months, and I'm still supporting University of Alaska's efforts through the Indigenous Pathways program. I'm mentoring Hukyunsk and Godum Tiban, who are both online, meeting with them regularly for the past over a year now. And so there's just a lot each of us could do, a lot of sacrifices that it takes to do it, but within our time, those sacrifices are nothing compared to the long-term sacrifice that would be the things that would be lost within our languages if we didn't do this work. So some for everyone and your incredibly inspiring efforts.
Wonderful. Joel.
So there's kind of two areas that thinking about the question of my experience in language revitalization, and I'm just thinking like dovetailing into those policy pieces. So one of the things that I do is I'm the tribal liaison for Alaska's Department of Education and Early Development. And so I spend quite a bit of time in the K-12, Western K-12 arena, and talking with tribes and Native NGOs all over the state and all over the US on language and culture. And they're fairly inseparable. And so that's one of the things that focusing energy on. As with anything policy-based, it's one of the things I was reflecting last night. We had wrapped up a 5-year language project that I've been working with my tribe here at the end of September, and we had a fire yet last night and just kind of celebrated some of our celebrations, because the COVID hit during like the middle of it. So it's like we should do something outside, and we were talking. I was thinking about one of the things that ʼunei had said previously in our conversations or at a conference, and just like keep the politics out of language revitalization or language work. And policy inherently has the politics woven into it, and it's one of the ways that education has been weaponized against our languages. And so just it's one of those things that I sometimes I struggle with, like how much energy goes into policy, how much energy goes into the language work itself. And so two of the things that are kind of like policy based that I've been working on with the department and partners. One of them came out this morning, and it's the Cook Inlet Tribal Council is working to develop an analysis and recommendation on Native education models for Alaska. And so there's looking at what are those Native education models, and having support to do that kind of work to where it's looking at policy pieces, but rooted in what do the communities need, versus a Western government agency saying, here's what you should do. And so that's been part of the, what do we do? No partnership's ever perfect. We always could be doing other and different things, but like thinking about what are those targeted ways that we get the policy matters that are critical up to the levels that need to be discussed to make those policy shifts. So that's one of those things that I'm pretty excited about. That's like, it's going to be starting here as like today. The other is the state tribal education compacting, which is not a new idea. It's been around for a long time, the idea, but I think it was July, that was where the department is partnering with AFN to scope out what compacting might look like in Alaska. So that's, again, no partnership's perfect, but it's definitely a big step to be able to have an entity really focus on it. Part of some of the work I've been doing with the department and with the state board has a subcommittee on tribal compacting. So there's these pieces about building capacity within the policy world that help get rid of or help lessen the barrier or make them shorter so that we can actually climb through or over those. So that's one of the things that I think about with the language work. The other thing that I do for my personal like Dena'ina language work is we've done strategic planning within our community and figuring out what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what do we have, what don't we have, and what's possible in our linguistic reality. Because it'd be great, like we want conversational. It's like, well, we don't have two speakers in the same room. We don't have two speakers that have connectivity to talk. So doing an immersive conversation thing, I can't raise the dead. So that's one of the, like, we just don't go there. We try to. And so one of the ways that we developed is creating stories where people are talking to each other. So we're creating conversation from one first language speaker who we have a Dena'ina family. It's a fictitious Dena'ina family. And Annie talks to her cheetah, her grandma, she talks to her brother. All these things that our first language speaker has done as a child, we have a way for her to be creative in storytelling in a Dena'ina way. So we're not just taking books and translating them. The other thing, like, so we're focusing quite a bit on literacy. So this is like one of those things, like we have our first baby board book, which I'm pretty excited about. So it's like we have gone through and it's like, what do we call our letters? Because we have letters in Dena'ina that we don't have in English. And it's like, what do you call them? And so we're going through those kind of like basic steps of literacy. And that's just kind of, that's the thing that we're focusing on. And then thinking about access. And again, we're focusing on print materials. So we have like little pocket dictionary that's coming out. This is the proof. So like within the next year, we'll have thousands of these floating around. So it's just like, that's kind of the immediate focus pieces for me and the communities that I work in, the policy community, the Dena'ina language community. And yeah, I just appreciate the time and being able to hear other people share their stories.
Chanan, Joel, and Roy.
Yeah, so my experiences and current focuses, I started off as a learner, second language learner of Inupiaq at the university. Dropped out of school for a while early in my master's program. I lived for 7 months in Kotzebue, and for part of that time I worked as a substitute teacher in the high school. Well, excuse me, K through 12. And so I got to see, interestingly, what was the model. I'll describe it as the prototypical model there, which was the Inupiaq granny would come to each classroom pushing her cart, and she'd have 15 minutes a day. And she had pictures of animals, and they talked in English about, well, what's our name for this animal? And they did coloring, and they would write it out and they would say it, which is a good way to learn words. But as I started to had the beginnings of glimmers of, but that's not going to lead to conversational ability. Few years later, I was living in Nome. I'd finished my anthro degrees and also a bachelor's in Inupiaq. And I was asked by the community college if I would team teach a conversational Inupiaq class. And I said no. For one, the dialect differences are huge. They're like between English in England and Scots in Southern Scotland. It's like, yeah, they're maybe the same language, but you won't understand the other person if you were not familiar with it. And the other thing is I had realized that I needed something different. And I encountered a short article regarding a communicative language approach, TPR. And so I went back to the community college president, back when we had community colleges in Alaska, and said, if you can help me find an Inupiaq speaking elder, who would be willing to try something new, I would love to try team teaching. And that's what I did, first with Margaret Sigana, and then later with Irene Armstrong. And I believe that was the first use of TPR to teach an Alaska Native language, starting in spring of '82. And the students loved it. And so we took it on the road and we did some in-services for some school districts. And we started doing demos at the Bilingual Multicultural Education Conference in Anchorage. So that's one of the big things for me then was, okay, we need to have language teaching methods that communicate in order to teach people how to communicate. Because for me anyway, that's the bottom line. There's other uses for language too, but one is to communicate. And it turns out humans cannot learn to communicate except through communicating. So there's that. I was also involved later in the late 80s and early 90s in Bethel with getting a Yupik immersion school going, which is now named in honor of the original lead teacher who's still there. She's been teaching kindergarten for over 50 years now in Bethel. Ayapun, Lottie Jones. And that's still a fantastic way to do it, to get new speakers. I got very interested in sociolinguistic aspects because I have degrees in anthropology, and I realized it's not just enough to learn how to speak a language, but the social factors going on can be even more powerful. And that's what sent me down to UC Berkeley, study with people there, like Leanne Hinton, who's done wonderful, still is doing amazing things. And with John Gumpertz, he, to some extent, but also his students, have done a lot with trying to figure out sociolinguistically what's going on when a community is losing its language and replacing it with something else. And that got me, and that's where I learned about language policy and planning. So these are the things that I've been working with. I'm still involved in one way or another with all of these: language teaching methods, curriculum design, what needs to be done to get immersion schools going, and also very excited with the master apprentice or mentor apprentice approach. For me, one of the big concerns is, depending on the situation of the language community, certain things will be brilliant first moves and others will be impossible. So, lots of people say, hey, let's have an immersion school, but we have no fluent speakers. So then that's not where you start. You need to start on another track. There's things that require, so some things have to come first. So the master apprentice approach is brilliant. In a way, it's absolutely nothing new. People have been doing that for thousands of years. You move into a new community and you live with someone who speaks that language to you. So it's fun to discover these again. And those are the things that I think of that I work with and want to see more of. Ganesh Chish.
Ganesh Chish. So in our kind of last 20 minutes here, and I just want to say, I don't want you folks to feel too rushed. I know we're just scratching the surface, but we'll have options of continuing this conversation. There's lots of ways we could do that. We could do part 2. I'd be happy to do individual interviews. I'm making a podcast on language revitalization that I think I'm going to call The Tongue Unbroken, so that we can have sort of these, because I always feel like we're running out of time even just to do the stuff and just to sit together. So I really want to thank you each for sharing your time with us. The next topic, and it doesn't matter if we don't get to all 4. I was just trying to think of things that we could just sort of move through. But just sharing some ideas, what have been the most effective strategies in language revitalization? And we'll turn it back over to Larry.
Wow. Do I have, or do we have time to think about that in Hawaii? But, basically, if I've overlooked this because it's been going on since, we've had, what is this, our 23rd high school graduation in Hawaiian language education, Hawaiian medium education. In other words, the student from preschool or maybe from kindergarten, age 5, all the way up to high school has graduated. Now we have had we're looking forward to our 23rd graduation. We just celebrated 20 years of establishing because when we establishing a K to sixth grade, because when we started, we had just 2 little sites, and one site had maybe about 7 children to start the site off. The other one had maybe about the same, maybe a little more, 11, 12. But just from that, I call it the yeast. And then the rest of the families that came in to join in this yeast, I'm getting into baking now. But again, as I'm hearing from Leslie and others, the policy, only Hawaiian, no English. And that in our education, we do not, we had to, at the beginning, translate what was available, but we do not want to just translate a Western system of education. However, the integrity of education is great because we need to live our language for today and for tomorrow. Therefore, there are so many new things that we have to catch up with. I'm talking just language-wise. And how do we deal with this connection to a global world, at the same time holding on to our little spot in the wider world as our own spot, and therefore always being cognizant and being strong and stronger for those kinds of concepts, because we can be easily swallowed up. And so I think that kind of a balance, because it's just not one way only. It's being a part of everything at the same time, which is very big, challenging job. But the main part is to maintain a philosophy of Hawaiian education, meeting the standards of what we are encountering in the standards of common education throughout the world, I guess. So that we're seeing that our language can thrive and live for today and tomorrow as well. And so as generations seem to move along, 20 years go by very quickly for an age of a child. And how much of that connection can we provide while we've already been separated to begin with from our strong foundations of traditional language and culture? So of course, here in Hawaii, as we're seeing the last of our native speakers, less than 30, our documentation has become very, very crucial. So I hope we are all preserving our languages in that way. I mean, we have now digitization, and that is just marvelous, what we're doing now with Zoom. So all of that kind of work and the challenge to bring this forward in the new technology, the curriculum that can be always revamped, not always the same. It's going to revamp and change, but in this change, sticking to our foundational. So every year we have our Punanaleo has a Ahanukia. Always, what is the mission? What is the mission? And the mission is to remind us this year, e pai pai ho ia kapohaku, which is set up the stones for a new foundation, because our stones from the past have been kind of crumbled away, but we need to rebuild that. But when we rebuild, we're rebuilding it upon our solid foundations, our traditional knowledge and language, but for a new home, a new house to live in. So these are some of the kinds of, I guess you call them, initiatives, not initiatives, but just standard philosophies that we are constantly reminding ourselves to do in our language, our way of seeing the world, and to participate in a healthy way with the rest of the world and ourselves first, being healthy so that we can participate in that way.
Mique'l, mahalo. Leslie.
It's so good when we get together and visit like this, and like the things I've been hearing, you know, the themes, even just from a little bit tonight, you know, are like capacity building and policy inclusion, which sound really clinical and really, you know, it can sound, you know, really kind of outside of our communities in some ways, you know, but really that's where we're at too. What has been really effective for us is recognizing that there are multiple approaches we need to take, and that we need a lot of community members participating in language revitalization. For a while, it was, you know, it was like, oh, hey, focus on the kids in school. And folks were like, well, what about their parents? What about, you know, the real common sense kind of questions? When the kids go home from school, who are they speaking the language with? You know, so really, you know, engaging that parent age generation and saying, what can we do to support you in language learning? That's where I like the master apprentice type, you know, really, really intensive, you know, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 hours of, you know, really intensive instructional time dedicated towards that, you know, regular ongoing classes and learning spaces in real life contemporary situations that are available to even the parent age generations in our communities is really important. And so building that capacity just in people who know how to speak our languages in real life, everyday settings. And it sounds so common sense, but it takes a lot to get there, right? So building the movement and the campaigns around that, and then also ensuring that we're building the policies to support that language. We have to build up personal policies in our homes that support a language-rich environment. For me, it's an Ojibwe language-rich environment. I raised my son in Ojibwe. He was one of the first kids in about 50 years who spoke our language as his first language. There was literally like a handful of people out of our, you know, out of our tribe here at Leech Lake who had spoken our language from childhood and maintained it. So really saying, I'm going to intently do this, you know, and our family supporting that. Now we have another new Ojibwe language speaker in our community. And he's going to be able to give that to his kids whenever he gets around to having them. But also public policy, making sure that we are the folks writing the policy. We're not just trying to carve ourselves into and distort and contort ourselves into something that doesn't make sense to us. For too long, Native folks all over the place have been ignored or erased in the policy arena and said, you know, just do what we tell you kind of thing. But where we write our own policies and say, these are our priorities. We are going to, you know, from our own local cultural perspective, this makes sense. We understand our excellence, our ways of knowing and being, and we're going to uphold those standards. In a lot of places, they probably exceed what the state policies, you know, require. And so making sure that our community members are there and articulating that and saying, these are the pieces that we're going to carry forward, and, you know, making sure that the conditions exist to put those into place and to continue to assert those policies.
Sheesh, Miigwech. Tsimshian Newsome.
Oh, Axet Newsome is such an inspiring panel. I teach some Aliach at over the past 4 years at every level of human development. With our K through 12 school, and now doing this work in the Head Start, but then having my own baby and learning from, the very beginning what language acquisition looks like. And I think that students get really hung up on when they're becoming teachers, what methods that they're interested in and they want to use. And my biggest suggestion to them is to get to know your students first, because there's so many things that just won't, I haven't seen approaches that work across the board for every different type of learner. And to know as many as you can, but not feel obligated to feel like you have to commit to, I'm just going to use the gray morning method. I'm just going to use where are your keys or TPR or TPRS and all of that. I never because I'm trained as a dancer in our traditional ways, and I always knew our songs through dance. I never thought I would sing, and I just, I still get really embarrassed when I have to solo sing to teach my nursery rhymes. But people find that as a good mnemonic device. Adults find it as a really gentle learning device that makes them giggle, but they find themselves singing through to remember what the name of clothes are, to remember how to say wash your hands in some Aliach. So one thing that's been really that I've wondered about and I want to do more work on because of things I've run into adult learners. What I love about teaching little ones that I realized right away after leaving UAS and going right into a K through 12 school is that you just get right to some Aliach. You just get right to the language. You don't have to create time and space within a classroom environment to talk about the traumas of our colonization, to talk about the traumas of our language loss and how the reclamation process brings out in people who have experienced and whether it's directly or through intergenerational trauma, having gone through abuse and all manifestations because of speaking our language. And what I felt like in my very first university class, because I had a boarding school survivor in that class who shared with us for the first time aloud, he said the person's name who had abused him in our community, in our village. And I thought, I need to go back to school for counseling. I need to go back to school. Like, I felt like I don't have the tools for this. I need to find the tools. And so I've been really interested, and I would love if anyone has any resources on learning about trauma-informed approaches to Indigenous language teaching. Because I've tried to create assignments. I know it sounds so like the worst thing you could say. I've tried to create an assignment around it, but I've tried to create exercises, I should say, that give people space within their own. I give a learning journal that they set their goals for the week, that if there are words in the language that bring up experiences, positive and negative, that they want to remember when they go back and think about their learning journey. But I just really feel like we all need more, and especially in Canada, as we go through this process of reconciliation, which the majority of the time is just re-traumatizing those that have suffered the worst, that we need tools that we determine are useful for us in this process of resurgence and reclamation.
Excellent. And Joel.
I think that creating safe space is one of the most effective things that I've experienced, and is really important to maintain. And that can be physical safe space, it can be emotional safe space, it like in a learning environment, all those different factors that come into it. And I think that's one of the pieces when going through and kind of like strategic planning, what are your revitalization goals? Are you working with elders? Are you working with kids? Are you working with family? Are you looking with just adults? Just like going through, because safety for someone who's gone through all of those life experiences to be one of the last people on earth who speaks a language, safety for them might look different than safety for a 5-year-old. And when you put those two together, that also creates a different kind of environment that just really taking the time to be in tune and go slow enough on those kinds of parts and give the time that it takes to figure that out. And that bringing in and expanding the work is another form of like considering safety for the workers who are doing that. So the analogy that I think about is when you have a sphere that's small, you have this volume surface area ratio that's highly efficient for a circle. But if it's a flat thing, when you draw a bigger circle, it grows a little bit. It's still bigger on the outside than it was on the inside before. When you make that into 3-dimensional space and then you grow by a little, the amount of volume that increases is huge, but you don't see it because the surface area is still super efficient. And each time you increase your radius, the amount of work that it takes that core to do in order to have it grow, it puts a lot of pressure and strain. So those core movers in whatever revitalization work is being done, they might have different support or safety needs to where their lives don't get broken apart completely, trying to keep things going. And so I think that's one of the really effective strategies, is to be very honest about what that looks like. Being very direct with it. I talked to my elders and the different people that we work with, like, does this make everyone feel safe in these kinds of questions, in these kinds of environments? When we're doing a class, if we don't feel comfortable, if we don't have that support, what does support look like for us as instructors? And then we have those conversations with the students, because it's not just about us as instructors. And so that we're able to understand how to keep that classroom environment and that learning to happen in a good way. And I think it goes with the learning, it goes with the teaching and the strategic planning, whatever method, whatever strategies you come up with, and your phases and your pillars and all the different things that you can do for strategic planning. If it doesn't fundamentally have that protective, safe quality, it won't be as successful in the long run. So that's just, I think, the most effective thing for me.
Janan. Well, I know you're hanging out with wonderful people when it feels like you just don't have enough time. So here we are at the wrap-up phase, but we'll figure out a way to have more discussions on this. I really, really ya atya wune awe wushich tu tiyang qaachtu yake adeyuk ail atkia ya hayuk atangidat. I really just love you all, and I'm so thankful we were giving each other respect, and just sort of sometimes we lift each other up because the work is hard. You're just out there in the mud all day, you know, doing this work and making these differences. So the way I think we'll close it is if you could tell me in a sentence, what do you think this future looks like in terms of this balance between our dreams and the reality that we're going to create? What do you think this looks like? So we'll go in the same order, and then we'll have closing remarks from Ronalda Cadiente-Brown from UAS, and then we'll shut the Zoom down. And thank you, Zoom, for not kicking me off at all today. I got shut down 4 times this morning. It was interesting to be frozen in mid-story, mid-sentence, and whatever. So, mahalo nui gunas chish ha'a Larry.
Okay, well, see, that's another big question, but I think gaining up. How should I say? Being very optimistic here in Hawaii about having less than maybe 30 children of native speaking children under the age of 17. Gee, back in, this is in the 1980s. And now having like, right now, this very moment in school, about 3,500 children in Hawaiian immersion schools or Hawaiian medium schools. And building up the count again of newborn, newly raised native speaking children from home, and having a system set up for them, educational system, to gain even stronger strength in our language and cultural identity. It's just wonderful. So very optimistic for us. It takes a lot of teamwork, maintaining to your vision and going for it. And it sounds pretty easy, but I know we're talking about it, there are challenges, but all of those challenges need to be met, and it can be. So Homau, meaning go forward, continue forward. Mahalo andui loa. Thank you for this opportunity, Kane and Leslie and Tinak. I see Tinak over there too. Mahalo nui for this gathering. Aloha.
Hi, aloha, mahalo. Leslie.
Minigan kea gigabimi weduma and getting way on. If we look at what does the future look like for language revitalization, for us Ojibways, and maybe for a lot of other folks, whatever we say in our language is going to come to be. So we're also very careful and very strategic with the things that we say. But what I said was that into the future, we're going to be making our sound, and that was inclusive, that we are going to do this, that this is going to live, that we will find ways to intently put our languages, keep them on our land and in our lives, whether through, through our very intent actions. Miigwech bisindameg ginawasa. Thanks for listening and visiting.
Some llawr news.
Oh, Gumgo Wen, Chine, Luko Agelt Ganu de Sagai Wenam Sagatwan. Thank you, Hune, for this meeting today. Gumgo Hausam, bless you all for your words. Luko Simgit Go to Zabum. This is really important work, and then up some local addixa god the chatni slagi gedum agwasam. I just feel the pride of our ancestors as we're talking to each other from all of these different experiences and language groups that in many ways have always been connected through our ancient trade routes, and now we have this ancient trade route called Zoom. And in terms of positivity for our language revitalization efforts, I'm working with one of our elders online by the name of Shugaina, who's a titsa for many of us online here, and to see what they have experienced, what she has experienced, and other some Aliach teachers her age have experienced in terms of there being very little interest when she started, and very little resources, to having to walk away due to politics, You know, my beep, Arnold Booth, all of his resources burned down at one time, burned, his office caught on fire, and he went back to it. And I just feel that this path that our ancestors have put us on, that when it's truly our calling, our God, that even if we have to go away and we come back, and that Shagaina, in having these conversations with her about it, she told me that have faith that if you don't do this work, if you don't get to something within our Somalia revitalization, someone else will. And I'm seeing it, and it's local ama wihoiska will dipnist. It's just gorgeous to see. Lifting up Godum Tiban and Hookjunsk, and I was a mentor this year, so I had an apprentice through First Peoples Cultural Council. My apprentice Ocean George Lynn is doing incredible work, and so many of our people are taking a stand and doing they are sharing their gifts with us, and everybody has different gifts to bring to our language revitalization in all areas. So I know there's a ton of students online, and students are always on my God. So just know that your gifts are precious and they're different than everybody else's, and keep bringing your gifts.
Oh, excellent. Joel.
I would say Chanikna Dochterdachen Yenizit, which is our children will be our teachers with good thoughts and intentions. So that's kind of what the future looks like. Janae.
Janan. You are all such sacred, wonderful people. Ronalda.
Oh, I appreciate so much this gathering, and I can't tell you how enriching it is and how precious each of you are for the work that you're carrying. And I recognize that it's a very heavy load. My Tlingit name that I was given at birth is Antacha'at, and the other name I'm privileged to carry, Kunach, from Kuich in Angoon. And I bring that forward in that my mother, Jigay Kla, and she also carries the name Junach Kla, is one of those individuals who had that precious life of the Tlingit language as her first language, and the challenges that she faced. And I would venture to say that it was her knowledge of the language and her persistence that carried her forward. She didn't begin to talk more fully about her experiences until I was studying the language. And this was over 20 years ago. And slowly that door opened towards some healing. And to the point that also she was stepping into classrooms and teaching. The healing that she experienced most significantly, I bared witness to, and it came from a 10-year-old girl who was listening to her telling a story and her life story at a camp, a culture camp. And this little girl went to her and said, "I apologize for my people for what happened to you." And she gave my mother a hug, and my mother gave her a bear hug back. From that moment on, after her tears, that's when her mind shifted to how she could embrace a different view of languages. Today, what I heard from this esteemed panel is that more than just the words and the vocabulary, is that your work is capturing the intelligence, the grace, the humor, the relationship and kinships, community and belonging. You're capturing the historical record of our people. You're capturing our geographic significance, the resources that our ancestors had stewardship over. And importantly, you're capturing heart and growth and healing. And for that, I can't help but be indebted to each of you for what you're bringing forward as precious knowledge to share with others so generously. That future does have it sounds like a future of technology and innovation. And ʼunei, I think the kick out that you experienced this morning was Raven playing with you after telling his story. So I just want to say, Ganoshish, Ha'a, and Doiksum Nusum, and Aloha for our dear people. And please keep up this most important work, and know that there are so many cheering you on and in awe of each of you. So with that, I will close, and Ganoshish for the opportunity to speak.
Gonna cheese, folks. We'll sign off now.